It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story, the search under the sea for the Titanic tourists. A submersible used to view the famous wreck goes missing in the Atlantic. After a marathon debate, MPs vote to approve the Privileges Committee report, which found Boris Johnson lied to the House of Commons.
It is important to show the public that there is not one rule for them and another for us.
They go from the vindictive to the ridiculous, with not allowing him a parliamentary pass.
The squeeze of soaring mortgage payments. We hear from those feeling tense about the turmoil in the lending market. David Cameron admits to the COVID inquiry he made mistakes, but denies austerity caused worse outcomes during the pandemic. Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny goes on trial accused of extremism, facing decades more behind bars. It's all set for an electric end to the first test at Edgbaston. We'll have the latest from the Ashes. And England's footballers thrash North Macedonia 7-0 in Euro 2024 qualifying, with Saka scoring a hat-trick. Plus, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's in the press preview from 10:30. A very good evening. Thanks for joining us. Tonight, there's a race against time to find the crew of a small submersible used to allow people to view the wreck of the Titanic. Contact was lost at around 10 a.m. with the vessel in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Newfoundland. The British billionaire Hamish Harding is one of those on board, and Sky News understands the French pilot Paul-Henri Nargeolet and the founder of OceanGate Expeditions, Stockton Rush, are also missing. In the last half an hour, it's been confirmed that specialist submarine search aircraft have been sent to the region to help. Well, let's take you through what we know so far. The 8-day expedition set off from Newfoundland on the US East Coast on Sunday morning. The submersible then lost contact with the research vessel at about an hour and 45 minutes into its journey to the famous shipwreck, which sits at nearly 2.3 miles down at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. These type of vessels are equipped with a 96-hour oxygen supply at the beginning of the trip. The time is now running out to find those on board. Our US correspondent James Matthews has this report.
She lies 4,000 metres under the Atlantic Ocean, an enduring attraction. Researchers and tourists pay good money to go underwater to view the Titanic. This is the small vessel that took the trip with 5 people on board and hasn't come back. Called the Titan, it's operated by the firm OceanGate Expeditions. A ticket to the Titanic costs £200,000 a head. The vessel is transported to the site of the wreck by the Polar Prince tugboat. Currently, it sits a few hundred metres from the location. It's understood that among the 5 on board is Paul-Henri Nargeolet, a French submersible pilot. So too is British man Hamish Harding. This is his Instagram post from last week, in which he said a weather window had opened up and they were going to attempt a dive. A Twitter post from Sunday spoke of a successful launch after a 4 a.m. start. With them is believed to be Stockton Rush, the founder of the company involved. He spoke to Sky News earlier this year.
That's what I love about shipwrecks. They are artificial reefs and they get populated quite quickly. I think most people are surprised by it, but it's an amazing thing that happens. And the hundreds of ships, thousands of ships from World War I and World War II of similar construction are at the bottom of the ocean, and they're creating these amazing man-made reefs. And so it's just incredible.
The Titanic shipwreck sits nearly 2.5 miles down at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. It's about 400 miles off the coast of Newfoundland in Canada. A multinational search and rescue operation is now underway. Coast Guard aircraft from Halifax and North Carolina are assisting in the joint effort. Sky News understands the missing vessel pings a signal every 15 minutes, indicating all is well. Contact was lost an hour and 45 minutes into the dive.
This is essentially a submersible, a leisure craft, if you like. It'll have some spare air and some in compressed bottles and things like that, which will enable it to do an emergency surfacing and also keep the occupants alive for some time, but it'll only last for so long. And the longer this goes on, of course, the more at risk the people inside that submersible are.
In a statement, the company involved, OceanGate Expeditions, said, "Our entire focus is on the crew members in the submersible and their families. We are deeply thankful for the extensive assistance we've received from several government agencies and deep-sea companies in our efforts to re-establish contact with the submersible." Typically, there will be equipment on board the vessel, including oxygen, to aid survival for a limited period. But as time elapses, so does hope. James Matthews, Sky News, in Washington.
So clearly a very worrying situation. Let's speak to James now for an update. In the last half an hour, there has been a news conference, James.
There has, yeah. They've given details of this search and rescue operation, Jonathan, and they speak of a challenging operation in a remote area. They say that the first priority is in locating this vessel, and that's not straightforward. Contact was lost after the dive, an hour and 45 minutes into that diving operation. Now, it takes 2.5 hours to get 4,000 metres under the Atlantic to where the Titanic is. So it's not as if the wreck marks the spot. They are searching under the water and on the surface of the water using vessels, using commercial assets, and also bringing in military aircraft, C-130s from the US and Canadian military, which have sonar capability. They are listening for sounds underneath the waves. All hope is not lost, I might point out. Indeed, the Coast Guard are reinforcing that the design and facilities on board, kit on board this vessel, it can keep people, it can sustain the human body for up to 96 hours. The Coast Guard said that they reckoned they had at least 70 hours of that left. It is a race against time.
It really is. James in Washington, thank you. And of course, we'll keep you up to date throughout the evening on progress with that rescue operation. Back here, 3.5 years ago, Boris Johnson led the Conservative Party to election victory. But tonight, MPs voted to remove his pass for the House of Commons, endorsing the Privileges Committee report, which found the former Prime Minister guilty of deliberately misleading Parliament over COVID lockdown parties held at number 10. Mr Johnson had asked his supporters not to vote against the proposed punishment. But there was also criticism for Rishi Sunak, who was not there for the debate. In the end, just 7 MPs voted against the committee's report, and there were shouts of "Who are you?" in the chamber. Our deputy political editor, Sam Coates, reports.
Boris Johnson has been elected in Henley.
A phenomena even before he was an MP. For the last 22 years, Boris Johnson, a fabric of our politics, overcoming setbacks, proving doubters wrong.
Leader of the House, Benny Moulton.
But now out. Another leaving do, but this time one he wasn't welcome at, as MPs decided on his punishment.
All members should do what they think is right, and others should leave them alone to do so. As the member for Portsmouth North, I will be voting to support the committee's report and recommendations.
Boris Johnson's predecessor also certain House Shield vote.
It is important to show the public that there is not one rule for them and another for us. If people see us making rules for them and acting as if they are not for us, that trust that I spoke about between the public and Parliament is undermined.
The chairwoman of the Privileges Committee was accused of bias, but she says she checked with government to make sure they thought she should stay in place.
I actually said I'm more than happy to step aside because perception matters, and I don't want to do this if the government doesn't have confidence in me, because I need the whole House to have confidence in the work that the committee has mandated. And I was assured that I should continue.
Some Tories did defend Boris Johnson.
They go from the vindictive to the ridiculous, with not allowing him a parliamentary pass.
I cannot see where the evidence is where Boris Johnson misled Parliament knowingly
After 5 hours of debate, the result was decisive.
The ayes to the right, 354. The noes to the left, 7.
One of the hundreds of Tory MPs that abstained was the Prime Minister, who found he had many other things to do in Downing Street.
Are you going to miss Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak? Or is it good riddance? Exactly a year ago, it was Boris Johnson who was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And while he and his allies might allege that a kangaroo court and a witch hunt has dethroned him in the period since, in the Commons, what we saw is Conservative after Conservative making clear they never want to see his type of behaviour again. It's not the birthday present he would have wanted.
Lower standards in number 10, but also in Conservative headquarters during the last contest for London Mayor. Police are looking again after this video of a campaign Christmas party emerged. The candidate, Sean Bailey, still in line for a peerage.
Unreservedly, I apologise then and I apologise now. It's a staff team that were given to me that I should... The buck eventually stops with me.
Do you think you should hand over your peerage? I mean,
look, that'll be for others to decide.
Boris Johnson himself largely out of view today. Allies insist that he's happy, but he rarely heads away from the cameras for that long.
And Sam Coates is in Westminster for us this evening. So, Sam, it was a mammoth debate in the House in the end, wasn't it? It has reached its conclusion. Will this result make things easier, do you think, now for Rishi Sunak?
It could just do, Jonathan. You only have to look at how decisive the result was in the last hour. 354 to, we believe, 7 MPs, just 7 defending Boris Johnson against the Privileges Committee findings. And this is an important moment. It's a humiliating moment for Boris Johnson, not the birthday present he would have wanted. It means that he will now not be able to claim the past that would give him the free run of the Houses of Parliament behind me, that is the entitlement of former MPs. Maybe not even something that he would have wanted, but definitely a symbolic act of punishment designed to show the view of the House of Commons in large numbers, a massive margin that is held tonight. Now, Boris Johnson ordered his allies to stay away from this vote, to in some senses make it less of an occasion, but there was a vote, and it will forever be remembered that he could only muster barely more than half a dozen on his own side. Now, Rishi Sunak decided not to take a sort of leadership role in this debate, left it to other MPs. He had prior engagements at a dinner tonight rather than taking part. But key allies of Rishi Sunak, the Chief Whip, his Chief Parliamentary Aide, they all voted against Boris Johnson. There's no doubt what the view inside number 10 is of Boris Johnson. I think there is a sense that they are glad that he and lots of his key lieutenants are not there anymore. The question is whether Boris Johnson can disrupt from the sidelines. He has done it before, but at points when he did it before, he was still inside Parliament. He now is a columnist and a private citizen, no access to the Houses of Parliament. How much of a noise can he make? Well, number 10 are hoping not that much.
OK, Sam in Westminster, thank you. The cost of living continues to cause anxiety for millions, and now experts are warning of a looming mortgage crisis. The latest figures show the average 2-year fixed-rate deal has risen to more than 6%. For many homeowners, it means they may be unable to afford their properties when their deals expire. And the impact goes further, with landlords raising rents to absorb their costs and lenders pulling deals off the market. Here's our business correspondent, Gurpreet Nawat.
Rampant inflation is forcing the Bank of England to raise interest rates, and this is feeding through into higher mortgage rates. You can see just how much they've risen over the last year and a half. The average rate on a 2-year fixed mortgage has now hit 6.01%. The 5-year, that's the blue line, has also ticked up. And the prospects for homeowners are now as bad as they were in October, just after the mini-budget. Uncomfortable news for a Prime Minister who was tasked with sorting out the mess of his predecessor. And these rates, they're going to stay higher for longer too. Look at the peak on the red line. Back in May, financial markets thought the Bank of England would start to cut rates by the end of the year. But now, if you look at the dark blue line in the middle, well, we'll be well into 2024 before the bank can even contemplate that. Remember, expectations about where the bank rate will go influence lenders when they're pricing their products. And all of this will come as a shock to the more than 2.4 million homeowners whose fixed deals expire between now and the end of 2024. Households will be paying, on average, an extra £2,900 a year. Over the 5 years to the end of January 2026, borrowers will have paid an extra £15.8 billion on their mortgages. That's a lot higher than we thought back in May. And for people like Megan Johnson, a single mother and junior doctor whose mortgage payments are about to leap by £300 a month, they feel like they're sitting on a ticking time bomb.
I'm actually going back into training in August, which obviously with the news and the junior doctor strikes, my pay is actually going to take quite a drastic cut come August. So I'm probably going to have to work more than ever just to find the extra £300 difference, to be honest. So it's going to be quite difficult, really, but obviously just going to have to juggle it, really, and work extra shifts.
It's important to properly convey the scale of this. For those who remember when rates were around 13% in the 1990s, 5 or 6% may not seem like a lot. But the headline figures don't tell us everything, because people are taking out much bigger loans these days. And when you adjust for the size of loans compared to income, well, it's a very different picture. People taking out new mortgages today are facing the biggest home loan squeeze since the housing crash of the 1990s. And the consequences of this go beyond homeowners. Proportionately, fewer people own their own home than 20 years ago. But renters will also be hit if landlords pass on higher mortgage costs to tenants. So it's a bleak state of affairs for a country already grappling with the cost of living crisis. The government has explicitly ruled out providing any support to homeowners, but with a general election on the horizon, the pressure to do something is unrelenting.
He's been keeping something of a low profile recently, but today the former Prime Minister David Cameron was back under the spotlight, giving evidence at the official COVID-19 inquiry. He acknowledged that there had been too much focus on planning for a flu virus type of pandemic and not enough on other potential threats. But he denied that his government's austerity measures played a part in a lack of foresight in preparing the UK's response. Here's our political correspondent Ali Fortescue.
He's a former Tory Prime Minister not often seen in public, but today David Cameron in the spotlight.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Over his planning for a pandemic.
Well, I think it was a mistake not to look more at the range of different types of pandemic.
And the austerity that came to define David Cameron's government came under attack.
If you lose control of your debt and you lose control of your deficit and you lose control of your economy, you end up cutting the health service.
Do you think that as Prime Minister, your government's failure to plan for the economic impacts on individuals and businesses played any role in the catastrophic loss of lives?
Well, I'm desperately sorry about the loss of life. So many people have lost people that are close to them, and there's been a lot of heartache, and obviously that continues.
And it is the loss of life that motivates the families who come to this inquiry every day.
I lost my father, John Lee. The lessons were there, plain for them to see, and nobody acted upon it at all.
Blame directed by some at austerity.
We have to make cuts in budgets because we're dealing with a record debt and deficit. They left us.
David Cameron and George Osborne's cost-cutting strategy, they believe, brought public finances under control.
David Cameron's argument is that he badly needed to repair the economy. Do you buy that?
Well, I think David Cameron is in denial. We had a country that was poorer and therefore sicker, and we know that those health inequalities had a big impact in the pandemic. And overall, our kind of resilience of our local government, of our other services, that had been cut to the bone as well.
David Cameron admitted today mistakes were made, but he ardently defended austerity. He said that schemes like furlough were made possible because the economy could cope with it. But this was a day where another Conservative leader was on the defensive, where once again 13 years of Tory government was being scrutinised. Scrutiny that is not helpful for the current Prime Minister.
An austerity programme that drained our services, or leaders trying their best in a difficult time. The inquiry continues. The verdict on Conservative Prime Ministers past and present still out. Ali Fortescue, Sky News, Westminster.
The man who wants to be our next Prime Minister headed north of the border today to set out Labour's stall in Scotland, where he knows he must win votes to get into power. Sir Keir Starmer outlined Labour's clean energy policy and pledged to create hundreds of thousands of green economy jobs. But will it be enough to swing key Scottish voters away from the SNP? Our political editor Beth Rigby reports from Leith.
Far away from the politics of Westminster, Sir Keir Starmer today in Scotland with a serious policy plan to transform the UK into a green powerhouse.
The reality is this: the moment for decisive action is now.
The man who wants to be PM with a pledge that all electricity be generated from low-carbon sources, be that nuclear, wind, solar, by 2030. Done through a state-funded company to invest in clean power, headquartered in Scotland, and with subsidies for thousands of green jobs, paid for by £100 billion or more of borrowing.
We can cut bills, create jobs and provide energy security for Britain. That's what a Labour government will deliver.
But the plan expensive, Labour in recent days scaling back its commitments. You have already U-turned on your £28 billion a year investment into green transition. Your shadow chancellor said it shows you can be trusted with the public finances. But doesn't it also suggest, as with Brexit, tuition fees, nationalisations, you're just like all of those other politicians?
On the £28 billion, we are doubling down. We're not backing off. So there's nothing here to read into any sense of lacking ambition or backing down.
Not backing down, instead pressing on, driving forward his missions for a Labour government. But this leader knows too, to deliver is a gigantic task. Clean power by 2030, so all of our electricity from renewables. Is that a guarantee or is it a target?
It's the ambition and it's doable. So
but it's not a guarantee because you might fall short because it is so ambitious.
What I've done is I've sat down with the sector and said, this is what I want to achieve. Is it possible for us to achieve it? So it's not just a target that hasn't been thought through.
From the industry, cautious optimism.
I think it's tough, but I don't think it's impossible. So the target for a decarbonised power sector by 2030, at the moment, you know, the IEA, which is the International Energy Agency, says that all developed countries need to achieve that by 2035 at the latest. So this is in line with the climate science.
But political opponents less convinced.
Why on earth should we trust a Labour Party that in successive UK governments has squandered not tens but hundreds of billions of oil and gas revenue and not invested but a fraction back into Scotland?
With Westminster bogged down in the Boris Johnson psychodrama still and the SNP reeling from the implosion of Nicola Sturgeon, Sir Keir Starmer here in Scotland has just announced the single most radical policy of his government should he win the next general election. Billions and billions of public money funnelled into the green economy, but voters taking a look at him might be wondering why he's not putting that money into public services like hospitals and schools instead. For now, smiles, the polls and prospects for this party positive, this part of the country crucial to any victory, and these politicians not taking anything for granted. Beth Rigby, Sky News in Leith.
The jailed opposition leader Alexei Navalny has appeared in a Russian courtroom facing the grim prospect of adding decades on to the long prison sentence he's already serving. He is by far Russia's most prominent activist and has mobilised thousands of people to protest against Putin's government. But getting his message out is getting even harder. Navalny has been held in custody since 2021 when he voluntarily chose to return to Russia. Sky's Moscow correspondent Diana Magne reports.
Alexei Navalny on trial again in a case which could add another 30 years to his term, this time on extremism charges. The trial happening not in Moscow but inside the prison colony 4 hours to the east, where Navalny has spent long spells in solitary confinement. journalists kept in a separate room. The audio connection abysmal as Navalny himself spoke, before the judge decided to close the trial altogether. Compare this gaunt figure after almost 2.5 years behind bars with how he was, rallying the crowds in protest after protest, defiant always in the face of multiple arrests, courageous enough to return to Russia even after he was poisoned, knowing he would face immediate arrest, the Kremlin always denying any involvement in his poisoning. His father, Anatoly, drawn and anxious, watching from a separate room. Both parents were there. They have endured so much. They have no shame, no conscience, no honour, his father said as he left. For all the secrecy around the trial, though, Navalny still managed via social media to call for what he says will be an election campaign against the war and against Putin. Wide-scale clandestine activism to try and turn the public mood.
The idea is to try to persuade as many people as possible using call centers, messengers, social networks, for them just to start to see the truth.
People living near the jail, now housing Russia's most famous prisoner, did not much care about his trial or about him.
Напишут. Правду нам все равно никогда никто не скажет. То, что нужно, напишут, прочитаем. Нам всем это не нравится, потому что мы за суверенитет страны. И нам пятая колонна, которая находится на стране, работает против России.
And this will be the problem he faces. If Navalny could not turn the country in the time when he was free, he stands an even smaller chance from behind bars, which is exactly why the Kremlin keeps him there. Diana Magni, Sky News.
Let's get some sports, and we're set for a thrilling final day of the first Ashes test tomorrow. The match is in the balance after day 4 at Edgbaston. Australia need 174 more runs to win. England need 7 wickets. Well, England began the day with a lead of 35. Joe Root wasted no time in trying to extend it. He smashed 46 off just 55 balls before he was stumped off Nathan Lyon's bowling. England kept losing wickets steadily through the afternoon session, including key man and captain Ben Stokes to Pat Cummins for 43. England were all out before tea with a lead of 280. So Australia chasing 281. They started well until Ollie Robinson got the breakthrough for England. David Warner caught behind for 36. And then Stuart Broad got to work first. He took the dangerous Marnus Labuschagne, the world's top-ranked batsman, went for 13. And then another huge moment, Broad getting the wicket of Steve Smith out for 6. Australia 107 for 3 at the close. They need 174 more runs to win. England needs 7 more wickets, all set for a dramatic finish tomorrow. A brilliant performance from Bukayo Saka helped England's footballers thrash North Macedonia in qualifying for Euro 2024. Saka scored a hat-trick in a 7-0 win at Old Trafford. Harry Kane got 2. Marcus Rashford and Calvin Phillips got the others. England have made it 4 wins from 4 in qualifying. Wales are facing a tough task to qualify for Euro 2024. They lost 2-0 in Turkey and had a man sent off. Looks difficult for Northern Ireland too, who lost 1-0 at home to Kazakhstan. The Republic of Ireland, though, beat Gibraltar 3-0. And that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we're going to take a first look at tomorrow's papers in the press preview, including this story. It's on the front of the Metro about tonight's top story, their headline, Hunt for Lost Titanic Sub. And tonight I'll be joined by Rachel Cunliffe, the Senior Associate Editor of the New Statesman, and also Harry Cole, the Political Editor at The Sun. That evening to both of you, chatting to them in a moment. Hello again, you're with Sky News. In a moment, the press preview, checking out Tuesday's front pages. But first, our top stories tonight. A search operation is underway off Canada for a commercial submersible vessel that's gone missing near the wreck of the Titanic. A British billionaire, Hamish Harding, is among those missing. MPs have voted overwhelmingly to back the Privileges Committee report into Partygate, which found that Boris Johnson lied about Downing Street parties. And the Prime Minister has ruled out any more government help for people struggling with mortgage costs as rates continue to rise. Good to have you with us this evening for the press preview. It's our first look at tomorrow's front pages. And checking out the headlines with us tonight, Rachel Cunliffe, Senior Associate Editor of the New Statesman, who's joined by Harry Cole, the Political Editor of The Sun. They're going to be with us from now until just before midnight. Good to see you both. We'll chat in a moment after we've had a look at some of those front pages. Hunt for lost Titanic sub is how the Metro reports on the search for a missing tourist submersible, which was diving to view the famous wrecked liner on the bed of the Atlantic. A UK billionaire is amongst those on board. Let's show you the front of the Mail. Also pictures the Titanic, the missing sub and that missing businessman, Hamish Harding. The Express describes the rescue effort for the 5 people on board as a race against time. Same story, in fact, and the main item on the front of tomorrow's Telegraph. Harry's paper, The Sun, also makes it the lead item, Brit on lost sub to Titanic. The Guardian leads with tonight's Commons vote, backing the report that said Boris Johnson lied to Parliament over Partygate. Here's the FT, leading with the growing pressure on homeowners from rising mortgage rates, along with the pressure also increasing on Rishi Sunak to do something about it. According to the Eye, the current high mortgage rates will stay that way for at least another 2 years. And just so that Boris Johnson isn't the only former PM taking flak at the moment, the Star turns its attention back on Liz Truss, who it once described as a wet lettuce, but she didn't find it funny, apparently. And don't forget, you can scan that QR code that you see on screen during the programme. Have a look at all the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you listen to us discussing them. And doing that with me tonight, Rachel Cunliffe and Harry Cole. All the front pages are highlighting this awful story which broke this afternoon about the lost submersible with a number of people on board going to have a look at the Titanic. Rachel, it's right to say this is a race against time. They've got about 96 hours worth of oxygen on board, and they've already been missing for quite some time.
Yes, it's the kind of story that you might imagine in a blockbuster thriller, only it's real. It's a submarine off the coast of Canada. They do trips to look at the wreckage of the Titanic. The cost of one of these trips is $250,000. So it's not just the kind of thing that you might pop on to do on your holiday. But it was meant to be an 8-hour submersive dive, and 1 hour and 45 minutes into that, they lost contact with the submarine. It's now been lost for more than 24 hours. And so you've got divers and rescue vessels that are desperately trying to locate this vessel. Unfortunately, it's really, really deep. It's several miles deep into the ocean. The ocean floor at that particular point is full of sort of deep trenches, and that's where the wreck of the Titanic is. There's virtually no light down there because you're so deep. And so locating anything in those kind of conditions is a real challenge, and obviously, as you say, the clock is ticking.
Yeah, front of the Daily Mail has that haunting picture of the wreck of the Titanic, and also a smaller picture, Harry, of the submersible that's gone to have a look at it. And on board, Hamish Harding, who is a very wealthy man, but he's also an adventurer, and also rather hauntingly, he posted a social media message saying how excited he was that a weather window had opened up, allowing this dive to take place.
Yeah, so I think it's actually down to 72 hours now if you take into account how long they have been missing. If you think how long it took to find the wreck of the Titanic, this is going to be a incredibly hard rescue mission. And as Rachel said, it does feel like something out of a sort of adventurer's film. I mean, this is not a mission without risk. The reason it costs so much is it is an incredibly hard part of the world to reach. As a sort of a tourist, so to speak, as a rescue operation, it's going to be even tougher. So a very grim story, and a race against time. I don't think really does it justice. I think it's looking pretty bleak.
Yeah, that's the headline on the Daily Express: race against time to rescue Titanic sub. I suppose the final thought on this, Rachel, really is that it's on all the front pages, this story, and yet there's so much going on in the world. But I guess it's a sort of an example of a story that is so unusual that it merits big headlines.
Yeah, it's unusual for a number of reasons. One is the sort of risk involved. One is the fact that it's the Titanic, which is something that everyone's heard of and that kind of holds a particular place in our cultural narratives and cultural imagination. But I remember when the schoolboys in Thailand were trapped in a cave and the world was trying to work out how they were going to rescue them. That was also on the front pages virtually every day for several days in a row. So I think there is something about these big rescue missions that does capture something and warrant this kind of attention. And that's before you take into account that there is a British man on board, which obviously gives it a specifically UK angle for the interest as well.
Yeah, I was in Chile for the run up to the miners being rescued, and that's all anyone was talking about, wasn't it, for days on end? OK, let's turn our attention then to events back here. Harry, the front of The Guardian: Tories round on Johnson as MPs vote to approve Partygate report. There was some question about whether it would be nodded through or whether a vote would take place. A vote did happen. 354 MPs voting to endorse the report, 7 voting against it. There were cries of "Who are you?" weren't there in the House?
Indeed. In fact, one of the 7 that voted against it was Labour's chief whip, because in order to force a vote, someone has to shout oppose to sort of test the will of the House, they call it, before a division takes place. And Boris Johnson had made it very clear to his supporters: call off the dogs, he said, don't die in a ditch. Don't do this on my behalf. There's a foregone conclusion to this vote. It's going to go through with a whopping majority, not least because a couple of hundred Tories, it appears, have abstained, including the Prime Minister and most of the cabinet. So actually, 7 MPs voted against the Privileged Committee report, which obviously, as we've been talking about for what feels like many days now, was throwing the book at Boris Johnson. If he'd still been an MP, he would have been kicked out of the Commons for 90 days. He's in a slightly sort of pathetic, petty little gesture at the end of it. He's having his pass revoked, so he can't come into the House of Commons without a visitor's escort, which I don't imagine has quite had the impact that perhaps they thought it might have done when that little punishment was drawn up. But it really does show kind of how, weirdly, in the end, toothless the Commons actually could be, because Johnson's already gone. They've got their conclusion. There was many hours today of pretty obvious virtual signalling from lots of people who wanted to queue up to put the boot in, but the horse has already bolted, so to speak. So a fairly pointless day in the House of Commons that I suspect could have been wrapped up in about 20 minutes.
Well, pointless, Rachel, but also hugely symbolic.
I think symbolic, yes. I mean, Harry is right in that it was a Labour MP who forced the vote, clearly, because Labour wanted the numbers. They didn't just want it to be nodded through. They wanted it on record that 354 MPs voted to endorse the report, which is a majority of MPs in the House of Commons overall, and includes quite a high number of Conservatives, and that only 7, if you include the Labour MP, 7 voted against. And they wanted, I think, those MPs who were going to side with Boris Johnson to put it down and have their names on record. And hey, like I can see why you might want to have a list and force MPs to put their money where their mouth is and really go, are you going to walk through that division lobby? And obviously some did. Others didn't. I don't think Nadine Dorries is actually on the list of MPs who voted with Boris Johnson. I think she abstained, as indeed did a very high number of Tory MPs. But I think that's interesting, given that she claimed that she was going to resign and then hasn't yet resigned, so could technically have voted for that. And on the revoking of Johnson's parliamentary pass, I mean, Harry's absolutely right in that it is pretty petty. It's also quite obvious reading the full report that additional punishment was intended kind of as a signal, in part because of Johnson's behaviour when he got the draft of the report going sort of ballistic last Friday, as we saw, and briefing out all the details of it. That was seen as particularly disrespectful and holding Parliament in contempt. So that's why that additional punishment was added. And it does mean that he's going to find it quite difficult if he ever wants to do some casual lobbying work on the side, not being allowed into Parliament to chill out with his former colleagues without a visitor pass. I think that's pretty symbolic too.
There aren't many jobs, Harry, are there, where you can keep a pass after you've been effectively sacked? I mean, what would happen if the Sun, if God forbid you ever were made redundant and you started turning up at work, waltzing around, going to the canteen, chatting to people?
Bring my sandwiches, pretend I've still got a job. No, fingers crossed that won't be happening anytime soon. Thank you. No, look, Parliament is not a normal workplace, is it? Though there's a unique sort of tradition that former MPs are allowed to sort of come and go. I think even their spouses are allowed access to the building as well. There's often, if you're a kind of senior politician, there is a sort of occasional ceremonial role that you get invited back for, but it is one of those slightly strange quirks about the building that actually, if you start to pull at the threads of it, you don't really understand why anyone's got it, but people just always have. And obviously, former MPs, Rachel's right, former MPs have got into trouble by having a few of those if they do end up becoming lobbyists. But I don't think Boris Johnson is going to be becoming a lobbyist when they seem to be stuffing his mouth with 250 grand a pop for one of his speeches. So as long as that lasts, and various other columns and books and the like, so I don't think he would need to be lobbying just yet. Okay. Not for policy anyway. Maybe for a change of Prime Minister.
OK, all right. Well, let's leave it there. Thank you both for the moment. We need to get to a break. Coming up after that, we'll be looking at what's making tomorrow's headlines, including this exclusive from The Sun. Just stop and listen. Poll reveals anger at the eco-elites. Asking Harry about that, I'm sure, all after the break.
It's actually really important for us to be looking at these images and to understand what's happening. So as we saw last week, this shipwreck was something that Greek authorities were actually knew about pre-happening. So what's really important is to understand that these deaths were really our fault and is something that could have been avoidable.
They were preventable.
Exactly, they were really unavoidable. And for us to be able to recognize that we are responsible for these deaths, I think is really crucial. And until we're not able, both in Greece, the rest of Europe and the UK, to offer safe legal routes for people to get here is something that we're going to continue on seeing, and something that I've talked about in this book that is getting published this week.
As someone who came from Greece himself, I have to say, unfortunately, because there isn't any safe routes, people are taking, these horrible journeys to come to the UK or reach to a safe country. But and everyone is like, oh, why you are doing these kind of things? But because there isn't any safe route. So I guess if, the governments can help people to open a safe route so they can follow that, that route to come to the UK instead of taking these journeys. Otherwise, many people are going to die. Like we had around 80 people who have lost their life just 3 days ago. Or like few months ago, when I think the ship was drowned in Italy, and many people have died again. Not long ago in France again, on the way to the UK.
I started this book because of my frustration with a lot of mainstream media and politicians, and the way that they scapegoat a lot of refugees and asylum seekers, and also represent them as, villains. We know the stereotypes of people invading our borders, invading our countries, and not really looking at people as humans and recognizing that, as you will see in the book, everyone has a different journey, like Ali has just shared with us, different stories, and being able to recognize that these are people seeking safety is a way to then be able to, I hope, to have empathy and care for people once they do get here. And this variety of stories is shown in these posters and these conversations, and really makes us look at the issue in a much more wholehearted way, I hope.
Part two of the press preview. Harry and Rachel are still with us. Rachel, the other main story on many of the front pages is the mortgage crisis. The average two-year fixed rates have breached 6%. Front of the FT, real pain for many homeowners.
Yeah, so 6% was the figure in December that kind of tipped it in, it sort of signified crisis point. And we're at that again now, which is a little bit terrifying for homeowners with mortgages, myself included. There are sort of renewed calls and increasingly loud calls on the government to sort of quote unquote do something about it and to help homeowners deal with this when they see their monthly payments shoot up. The problem is that the mortgage rate increases are because of Bank of England interest rate rises, which are what the government, a part of the government's plan to curb inflation. The idea is that if you have higher interest rates, then you'll have higher mortgage rates, you'll get less demand in the economy, and inflation will come down, which is obviously one of Rishi Sunak's key priorities and is a really sort of big economic challenge that impacts just about every aspect of our economy. So on the one hand, you've got the government saying, yeah, this is really painful, but we need it to happen in order to get inflation down, which is really important. And then on the other hand, you've got sort of lobbying for, but the government must do something to help people. If they do, though, they're kind of undermining the plan to stall inflation. So there are no good options here, and it's going to get very, very tricky.
Yeah, Harry, the front of the Telegraph talking about those comments by Michael Gove saying that 25-year fixed-rate mortgages could potentially help solve the crisis. I mean, it's much less devastating in other countries, isn't it? In France, you can get a 25-year mortgage at the moment for 3%. Why is it so bad here?
Well, there are high interest rates. It'd be unfair to say there aren't high interest rates around the West. America are starting to come. Well, it looks like it's peaked, but it is worse here, and the government are in real trouble here because 1.4 million people, it's estimated, are going to have to remortgage this year. And it turns out that mortgage holders are a pretty vocal and pretty active block of the electorate that take things pretty seriously and actually turn out to vote. And no government has ever won an election without having the support, the majority of mortgage holders. And at the moment, if you're looking at some of the polling done of them now, they're all going Labour's way. So a ticking time bomb for mortgage holders, a ticking time bomb for the government, this one. They'll be keen to try and blame Liz Truss for it, but actually those rates keep going up. And there's actually, as Rachel said, there's not a huge amount that actually they can do because the Bank of England is independent. They can make as much noise as they want about the bank, urging the Bank of England to take people into account. But we've got to a stage very quickly, actually, in a way that has been never unheard of before, that actually politicians, frontline politicians are openly saying there should be a sort of bailout for mortgage holders, which, sort of post-COVID, where the government stepped in on furlough and then they stepped in on energy prices. And then now there's calls for them to step in on mortgage prices. A, where's this money going to come from? And B, where does it stop? When does, it's basically a one-stop shop to a sort of universal basic income, I think is the inevitable conclusion of this. And that's, a lot of people didn't sign up for that. The other point I'd very quickly make on this is that there's been some wry smiles, I think, from renters who are hearing lots of mortgage payers say, well, more than a quarter of my income's now going to go on my mortgage. It's like, well, yes, anyone that's tried to rent in the last 10 years can tell you that's actually not bad compared to some of the statistics we've seen for the amount of money that people in the rental market have had to pay. So if you're going to bail out the mortgage market, prepare for a lot of very angry renters.
OK. Rachel, I'm going to do a slightly strange thing now and ask you to describe a story that's in The Sun, just because Harry had a long answer there.
Sorry, that's my fault.
Oh, no, it's fine, it's fine. Just tell us about this, this poll, Rachel, about the eco-elites.
Well, The Sun have done a poll of voters and how they feel about net zero, specifically how they feel about having to pay more for various things in order to reach our net zero target. And I'm going to pass on over to Harry to quickly, hopefully, say what he thinks it says, because I think it says something different, but I think he should get in there first.
Very quickly, it turns out that politicians are very out of touch with the public on this. 85% of the public say politicians, MPs that pass this legislation do not understand the pain that people are feeling, and they do not want to be the ones that have to carry the cow for this. They don't want to get rid of their boilers. They don't want to be forced to have electric cars, and they want things to slow down and cost of living to come first. OK, that was very honourable, Rachel. Thank you. We'll give you lots more chance to speak in the next hour. Thank you both very much. We're going to take a quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Yes, temperatures will remain above average this week, potentially turning hot by the weekend, but it will be quite unsettled at times. Tuesday will start largely fine with any early fog lifting, but parts of the muggy south of Britain will be wet, especially the southwest. Heavy rain, thundery in places, will move northwards across more of England and Wales during the morning, reaching southeast Scotland later. Showers and thunderstorms will break out ahead and behind that rain, and across Ireland and Northern Ireland too. But there will be sunny spells in between. It's going to be warmest in the east. Now, the afternoon will see heavy rain easing away from northern England while pushing across eastern Scotland. Elsewhere, expect a mix of sunshine and showers with hail and thunder, most likely in heavy downpours across central and eastern England as well.